Hi, everyone. John Hammontree here, and welcome back to another episode of the Reckon Interview Live. Today, I am talking with Kristina Scott of Alabama Possible. We're going to be talking about poverty. We're going to be talking about unemployment. We're going to be talking about the census. We've got a lot of ground to cover. Please join us, ask your questions in the comments, and we'll get started. Kristina, thank you for coming on.
Well, thanks for having me.
I know that you guys over at Alabama Possible have been very busy over the last year. A few weeks ago, you put out the new poverty data sheet that you do every year. I know a lot of this information predated COVID and predated the pandemic. Predated the recession. So what can you tell me about where Alabama stood at the moment of the report?
So at the moment of the report, we were the fifth poorest state in the country, and more than 800,000 Alabamians live below the federal poverty line. That includes 256,000 children. The federal poverty line stands at about $25,701 for a family of four. So it doesn't really reflect what a family needs to be economically self-sufficient. But rather it's a measure that's been constant over the course of the last 50 plus years so that we can measure poverty from year to year and decade to decade. Now that now that the pandemic has hit Alabama and hit the country, you really see job loss impacting Alabama families. When we started putting this together, Alabama was at nearly full employment. We were, most folks who were in the workforce had jobs. But since March, about 500,000 Alabamians have filed for unemployment, and we're going to see those impacts for the next year as our economy continues to respond and shift in response to the COVID-related closures.
Well, it kind of paints a picture of how precarious even full employment can be, that, within a span of a few weeks, we would go from full employment to record-breaking unemployment claims. And a number of people who have been trying to file unemployment, we were reporting today on AL.com that we've had people lined up for days in order to file their claims. And we're seeing a lot of people being pushed to the breaking point. Do we anticipate that the measures that the federal government has taken have been enough, or are we going to see more Alabamians kind of fall into that unemployment trap?
There's research out that just came out in the last few days that the CARES Act relief for people who have lost their jobs due to COVID has kept millions of American families from falling below the poverty line. But that relief expires in July. Lots more people are coming. They're losing their jobs now where they might have been able to hold on earlier this spring. And we don't know whether the federal government is going to continue any kind of direct relief for families due to who are experiencing COVID-related unemployment. Also, it takes time to get your unemployment benefits processed. States have been overwhelmed by the number of requests. Alabama's actually been doing a great job with that, but it still takes time, and our families are vulnerable, and they have cash flow problems. Maybe the check doesn't come for 2 weeks, the unemployment check doesn't come for 2 weeks, but when you're living paycheck to paycheck, you can't wait. And so even when there are generous unemployment benefits, you still see that there's more month than there is money. You're going to run out by the end of the month. And that's why we see such tremendous need with food banks and food distribution sites. Also, with schools closed, the majority of Alabama public school students rely on free and reduced lunch for their meals. And so you had families who were used to having their kids eat breakfast or lunch at school, and they're no longer able to do that.
Right. And looking back at the report that you released earlier this year, what's poverty look like in Alabama? Who is most affected by it? You said 800,000 people. Is that all evenly distributed across the state? Are there areas that are more high poverty than others?
Yes. So I'm going to use my visual aid here. We have this data sheet up on our website. You can see it at alabamapossible.org and follow the programs link to the poverty data sheet. So poverty is highest in the Black Belt counties that are in the dark green along here. And 10 of our 67 counties have a poverty rate of higher than 25%. So even in a year where the poverty rate was lower than we'd seen it in years, you have 10 of our 67 counties where 25% of the people in the county are experiencing poverty. 8 counties have a poverty rate higher than 30%. And those counties are also our Black Belt counties that really are still dealing with the lack of investment that's due to our state's civil rights history. Only Baldwin and Shelby counties have poverty rates of less than 10%. And even within those counties, you have some very poor small communities. You know, for instance, when you go to Western Shelby County, you're going to see something that looks very different than when you're driving down the 280 corridor past Greystone and see the mansions. So Shelby County has its roots as a small rural county, and there are communities where there are very economically vulnerable folks. My friend Holly Cost, who's the mayor of Montevallo, really makes it a point to talk about the challenges that people in her community face. And that's not just because they're college students, that's because they're families that don't have jobs that will pay them a wage big enough to support their family.
Well, and if we were at near total employment, near full employment before the pandemic, would that indicate that, you know, there's a lot of people who have jobs, but those jobs still may not be making enough money to break the poverty threshold?
Yes, and even when we talk about the poverty threshold, median household income is also a measure of states' economic self-sufficiency and economic security. Alabama has a median household income of $49,881. That's $12,056 less than the nation's median household income. And it's not because our cost of living is so much less here in Alabama. It's because our people make less money. And so that really speaks to Alabama families' economic vulnerability in a time of great uncertainty in the economy. And we see that race plays a huge part of a family's median household income. So white families' median household income is $55,690. African Americans' families' median household income is $32,188.
So almost half.
Yes. So there's a $23,000 difference between those two numbers, almost $24,000. And Latino families have a median household income of $38,314. Alabama's, especially at this time, we have such a difficult racial history as a state. Our history as a slave-owning state, the divestment from Black Belt counties, the divisions in what's available based on zip code, and the opportunities historically that African Americans have not had to build assets, to get a quality education, and to have access to the same social capital. And we really see those gaps when you look at median household income. I mean, that just really makes it clear the different opportunities that people have based on the color of their skin and their zip code.
Well, and we're seeing that manifest itself in the pandemic itself as well, with African Americans having disproportionate fatality rates from COVID. A number of the essential workers, whether it's grocery employees or frontline workers, a lot of them don't have access to health insurance, and so I would imagine, I don't have a crystal ball, but imagine that at some point that's going to to fuel this poverty story as well.
Exactly. So someone asked me at the beginning of this if I was surprised that African Americans were more impacted by COVID than other groups. And I just said no, because of the things you talk about. We have gaps in educational attainment based on race. African Americans are more likely to have those frontline jobs that were deemed essential, even though they pay much less an hour than so many of us who have office jobs make. They're more dangerous and pay less. And so they're more likely to be vulnerable. They're less likely to have jobs where they do get health insurance at work. And even for families that have health insurance, if you are living paycheck to paycheck, it can be really challenging either A, to get to the doctor, or B, if you have a high deductible plan, can you even afford to go to the doctor? I get more information about what it costs to get my car repaired than when I go to the doctor for tests or, for some kind of diagnosis. When you get your car repaired, they're like, well, it's going to be $200 for this and $197 for that. And you go to the doctor and they're like, well, we're going to order these tests. And so I understand that having health insurance is not the same as having access to health. Right. And that's really playing out during the pandemic and for all low wage workers, but particularly for African American families that are disproportionately impacted by this.
Well, and this brings us to our next point, which, a lot of people may not think about how these two are related, but a lot of the services that we get, particularly from the federal government, to address things like unemployment and poverty are based on census rates, right? People think of the census as maybe being tied to congressional seats, but not everything else. What is the census and why is it important right now?
So the census is the count we take each year of every man, woman, and child in the United States. And no child is too small to be counted in the census. Children under 5 are one of the most overlooked groups for census participation. Alabama counts on our census participation for our representation in Congress, our representation in the Electoral College, so it impacts our influence over the presidential election. And we're also the fourth most dependent state on the federal government. And so we love low taxes in Alabama, and we really rely on resources from the federal government in order to strengthen our communities. And so that impacts schools, it impacts access to healthcare, rural fire departments, broadband, which is such a hot topic right now. All of that funding is allocated based on the census. And so it comes to about $1,567 for each Alabamian is the federal funding that we can pull down as the result of our participation in the census. We are in the midst of the census self-response period right now. Alabama currently ranks 31st in the country for census participation, and fewer than 60% of households have participated. So someone who has not filled out their census form yet. And I know my friends are tired of me asking them if they've done their census. So that's something each one of us can do that will help us recover from COVID, that will help our economic recovery, is going to my2020census.gov and fill out the census. I did it online. It took about 5 minutes. You probably have received a postcard at home, but if you have not received a postcard, if you lost it, you don't have to have it in order to participate in the census. And there's also an 800 number that you can call to do your census over the phone if you're not comfortable doing it online, or if you're someplace with your grandmother and she doesn't have access to the internet at home, she can just call and do it over the phone. The self-response period is going to go through the end of the summer, and then the census workers will start knocking on people's doors who have not participated in the census. So I like to say, if you want to keep the federal government away from knocking on your door, you better do your census now, or they're going to keep coming back to do it. And
particularly right now with COVID.
yes, exactly. Like, one, we don't want census workers to be in danger, but also now we really don't want strangers knocking at our doors asking us to do something. So we can stop that and fill out the census ourselves.
Well, and if you're watching this right now and you haven't filled out your census, please do. If you reason to compel your friends to fill out the census, just list through everything that Kristina just said, show them this video. It seems like, and this is just an estimate, but based off of parts of the state that usually have a lot of people in it in April and May, like college towns, Lee County and Tuscaloosa County, are they going to be negatively impacted by the fact that all of these students were suddenly gone during the census period this year?
So the official guidance is that college students should fill out the census like they were in Tuscaloosa or they were in Auburn or wherever they're going to school. That said, I can't imagine that there's not going to be a negative impact for college towns because it's confusing. When I was out earlier this year doing outreach for the census, one of the most common questions I got was, where do I count my college student? Do they count at home or do they count where they go to college? And when the college students were at home on April 1st, which is Census Day. And so I think it's highly likely they're going to be counted in their homes. And, in Tuscaloosa particularly, there's so many out-of-state students, also in Auburn, so many out-of-state students that would help bring resources to the state of Alabama that we need to support these out-of-state students. And so, it's just another source of stress and worry for our college town mayors. And I wonder what the Census Bureau is going to do about that. But the message for families who have a college student who typically lives outside the house, they should be counted in the census where they live. And even if you've already filled it out at home, what the Census Bureau says is that they have some ways of determining that if you count a student at home and you count them in Tuscaloosa, and I'm just going to say that because I know you're in Tuscaloosa.
That's right.
So, if they also count themselves in Tuscaloosa, the Census Bureau has some data checks to figure that out. So go ahead and ask your college student to fill it out with their college address, not based on their home address. And again, they can do it online or over the phone, and they do not need their household ID in order to get it done. They just need their address.
Well, and as we wrap up, the main takeaways are that each individual who fills out the census results in real dollars that come to the state for SNAP benefits, for unemployment benefits, for roads, for economic development projects. Everything is formulated based off
college
of
financial aid, lunches at schools, Medicaid and foster family benefits. That's all based on census funding.
So it affects our hospitals. It affects, every part of life in Alabama, because, as you said, we are the fourth most dependent state on federal dollars. So please, if you are watching this and you haven't, please fill out your census.
Indeed.
Well, Kristina, thanks so much for your time today. And is there any last remarks you want to offer anybody who's watching out there?
So our poverty data, census participation, all these things that can seem really overwhelming. That said, we all can do something. We can give to a food bank or to a charity of our choice. We can advocate. Asking your family members to take their census is a form of advocacy. And I really hope that we have robust participation, particularly from our African American and Latino families, because we want to know that they count in the state of Alabama and that our census results reflect the real diversity of our state. And you can get out there and volunteer. And volunteering certainly looks different right now than it has in the past, but we can give our time to causes that we believe in. And so, as my grandfather would say, do something even if it's wrong. But don't be afraid to get out there, to use your voice, to use your time, to give your treasure and help our neighbors and help our state meet its full potential. If we don't do it, who is going to do it? And it's up to us. today to take action.
Well, Kristina, thank you so much.
Thank you.